Well, now I'd like to invite up Andy Wong.
Good morning. My name is Andy Wong, and I'm one of the many volunteer leaders that organizes this event. And I was also moved, Connie. Thank you for sharing your story. And you know, one of the things that is natural response is, what can I do after I hear a story like that? And I just want to point out that there are many nonprofit sponsors all around here and out in the lobby that are doing great work that address some of the issues or some of the things that came up during Connie's story. So I encourage you to visit those tables and learn more about what they do, and if you're moved to participate or support them, we encourage that as well. On behalf of the leadership committee that works on this event, I'm also pleased to announce that everyone here will receive a copy of this book, Finding God in Silicon Valley, Spiritual Journeys in the High-Tech World. If you enjoyed or appreciated the story that Connie shared, you'll find many, many more stories like that in this book. And what I appreciate about it is that this is not a book about perfect people living perfect lives who happen to be Christians, but it's really a compilation of a lot of imperfect people who are in process and are seeking out their faith and trying to find out what life is all about here in Silicon Valley. And we are actually very fortunate to be with the author of this book, our very own MC, Skip Vaccarello. So I'm going to ask Skip a few questions about the book and let him talk a little bit about it. But before I do that, I thought I'd share a little background about Skip. How many of you have ever used a spreadsheet? Excel, Google Sheets, maybe if you're old enough, Lotus 1-2-3? Well, back in 1979, Skip and Jackie moved from New England to the Bay Area so that Skip could be the very first employee of the company that launched VisiCalc. For those of you who don't know, VisiCalc was the first spreadsheet, and you can make the case that it was the first killer app that made the PC ubiquitous as it is today in corporate America. I mean, try to imagine life without spreadsheets today. My wife uses it to plan vacations. So prior to moving out here, Skip also graduated from Harvard University and Boston University. And for the past 30 years, he's held leadership positions in some of the pioneering companies here in the Valley. He was the general manager of 3Com. He co-founded the Saratoga Group. He's the twice retired CEO, once from Applied Weather Technology and once from Communication Solutions. But I also know him as my neighbor, and I've seen firsthand that he is the loving husband of his wife, Jackie, the devoted father of his two daughters and their husbands, and the doting grandfather as well. This is Finding God in Silicon Valley is Skip's first book. So Skip, could you tell us a little bit about how you came up with this idea and what inspired you to write a book?
Well, thanks, Andy. You know, I never thought when I went about 20 years and was not a follower of Christ, never thought I would have written a book, never thought I'd be here talking about my Christian faith. But I did come to faith in 1986, and it became the most important thing in my life. I went back to a Harvard reunion in 1996. And at that reunion, there was a breakout session, a group of Christians got together, and I wasn't a Christian when I was in college, and they probably looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" But anyway, we were given a book called Finding God at Harvard. And the author, Kelly Monroe Kullberg now, had this idea to have stories of people, you know, who were of some intelligence, who also believed in God. And it gave me the inspiration to put together a book, Finding God in Silicon Valley, because as God and Harvard don't seem to fit together, God and Silicon Valley also doesn't seem to fit together either. So that was my inspiration for it. But I should say that was in 1996, and the book was published in October of 2015, so I'm kind of slow. But the fact is, I found I couldn't work full-time and also write the book.
Well, you know, I really enjoyed reading your interviews with some of the Valley's legendary leaders like Pat Gelsinger, Kevin Compton, and Pramod Hawk. And I was actually also encouraged by reading about some of the next generation of leaders in the Valley, Facebook's Deb Liu, Google's Kirk Perry, as well as VMware's Sanjay Putin. So how many interviews did you actually do, and what was that like for you?
Well, I started with a blog in 2013, and there were about 80 people that I've interviewed. Now it's getting close to 100. There were 27 stories in the book, and just sort of categorized by faith and success, with stories that really came to faith through success. Some who came through faith through adversity, pain, and struggle, and some who came to faith through reason, science, and the search for truth, and also a section on finding a higher calling. So that's how the book is organized.
And so during this process, what were some of the surprises that you discovered along the way?
Well, good question. There are probably three main surprises. When I started the book, I really had just this sense of highlighting leaders in Silicon Valley, and that people may help people in their faith walk by seeing, wow, these people believe this stuff. But the surprise is that maybe in the last 4 years or so, I've seen a real movement of God in Silicon Valley that I hadn't seen before. And there's a variety of things that I've seen. There were new churches being planted. Just last week alone, there were four people that are planting new churches in the Bay Area that are starting up. We see some of the churches expanding. You might be familiar with Transforming the Bay with Christ, which Pat Gelsinger started, which is trying to unify the Christian community, provide incredible service in the area, and also to help facilitate the planting of new churches. So God's really moving, and that was a surprise to me. The second surprise is that I came across a number of young entrepreneurs who were building their businesses to glorify Christ, and I didn't expect that. You know, sometimes we hear about the millennial generation is lost, much like my generation, the baby boomer generation. But it was, to me, it was very encouraging to see these young entrepreneurs building their businesses on biblical principles to glorify Christ. And the third is that I see God bringing people into this area. We're going to hear from Kirk Perry, from Henry Kasner. God brought those people into this area. And they've had interesting comments, and that is where they might have come from in the Midwest or the South, where it's part of the culture to be a Christian, certainly isn't here in Silicon Valley. But what they've found is the people that they've met, the followers of Christ that they've met, tend to be more committed and more surrendered to Christ. And when I thought about that, it made some sense, because there's not a perceived advantage to be a follower of Christ in Silicon Valley. So if you are, you should be all out there. So those are the three surprises.
Yeah, it's definitely, it feels like that God is definitely doing something in this valley that wasn't happening prior. And in fact, this morning I was just talking to the CEO of my company, Intero Real Estate, and he was saying we should get a group of people to meet on a regular basis to talk about God and their faith. And I was very encouraged. And there's people here like Roy Tinklenberg, who heads up Campus Connections, who actually facilitates these kinds of groups meeting together at various companies like Facebook and Google. And I met a number of them here this morning as well. So Skip, what's your next project? What do you have coming online?
Well, people often ask me, you're going to write another book? And the first time they asked that question, my wife Jackie was there, and she said, no, not now. So she was very involved in the process, and that was about 6 months ago when the book was published. But I expect that there will be something else maybe in the next year or two, and I have a new website called skipvaccarello.com if you want to keep track of what might be next.
All right. Well, there's also another website that is called findinggodinSiliconValley.com, which is a long one. So if you just Google Finding God from SiliconValley.com, it'll come up. And and so if you like the stories that you've heard and you like the stories in the book, Skip continues to interview people, and he posts this as a blog. And so on a regular basis, he's posting new interviews and new stories about people right here in the Valley. So again, this book is available for you for free, and it'll be at the registration table on your way out. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Thank you.